I wasn't always the guy who whispered his name at Starbucks like it was a felony. Once, I was a tenured professor at a prestigious university on the East Coast with a nice corner office and a shelf full of books I actually read. I wore tweed jackets without irony. My lectures on 20th century American literature had a cult following. I was the kind of man who said things like, "Faulkner is a labyrinth," and meant it. But then Madison Kingsley walked into my classroom like a Prada-scented wrecking ball. She was the kind of student who treated a C as a declaration of war and had a daddy who could probably buy the moon if he wasn't too busy buying senators. Blonde, always manicured, with a permanent expression like she'd just smelled something poor. She didn't so much attend class as she graced it with her presence. And by graced, I mean sat in the back, scrolling through her phone, while I discussed Sylvia Plath's subtle descent into despair. God, the irony. The first red flag should have been the email. "Professor Blake, I think there's been a mistake with my grade. I deserve at least a B. Let me know when we can meet to fix this." Not discuss, not review, fix. Like my syllabus was a loose pipe under her sink, I politely declined her offer to reconsider based on vibes, I guess. Told her the grade reflected the quality of her work, not her brand of moisturizer. She didn't take that well. Over the next few weeks, she showed up during office hours like clockwork, batting her lashes like they were weapons of mass distraction. She'd lean over my desk, always a little too far, her perfume trying to chloroform my sense of ethics. I maintained professionalism like it was a crumbling dam. "I just think you're being unfair," she said once, lips barely moving. "Don't you think I deserve better?" "You deserve honest feedback," I replied, "and a dictionary, because unfair isn't the same as accurate." She smiled like she was filing that away for later, and then it happened. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I had forgotten my lunch and spent the day subsisting on stale coffee and shame. Around 4 p.m., I was called into the dean's office, which felt like being summoned to a medieval court with Wi-Fi. The dean was a man who had mastered the art of looking concerned while internally calculating the optics. "There's been an allegation," he began, hands folded like a villain in a corporate noir. I laughed. "Because I'm an idiot." "An allegation of I asked, already regretting every interaction I'd ever had since puberty. "Sexual harassment," he said, and the word cracked through the air like a whip. "By one of your students, Madison Kingsley." I think I said, "You're kidding?" Or maybe I just said, "Fuck." Either way, it didn't change the expression on his face. Apparently, Madison had filed a formal complaint stating that I'd propositioned her during office hours, told her she could earn a better grade if she was willing to be flexible. The language was vague, just enough to be damning. She even attached a screenshot of a text conversation, heavily redacted, of course, a text I never sent. I don't text students. I barely text my mother. My office was placed on leave pending an investigation. "Standard procedure," they said, like losing your reputation was just a mild inconvenience. My email access was revoked within an hour. Campus security escorted me out like I was some kind of intellectual leper. The looks on my colleagues' faces, some horrified, some smug, are seared into my memory like a bad tattoo. I went home to my one-bedroom apartment with a bottle of whiskey and the realization that cancel culture doesn't wait for facts. It just eats. The news spread like wildfire. Madison's father was a board donor, of course, the kind of man who calls the dean by his first name and gets invited to donor appreciation weekends in Aspen. Local media picked it up within a day. Tenured professor under investigation for inappropriate conduct. Not alleged, not accused, just guilty by headline. My neighbors avoided eye contact in the elevator. My barber said he was fully booked indefinitely. Even the guy at the liquor store started carding me again, as if drinking was a privilege I'd lost along with my credibility. I tried reaching out to friends and colleagues, Hell, even my ex-wife, but no one wanted to get involved. Academia has always been a coward's game. Nobody wants to stand near the accused when there's blood in the water. They just circle the drain, hoping the splash doesn't reach them. The investigator assigned by the university was named Carol. She wore beige, like it was armor, and never blinked. She asked questions with the warmth of a DMV printer. Did you ever touch her? No. Did you ever make suggestive remarks? Not unless quoting Nabokov counts. Would you say she seemed attracted to you? Only in the way a cat is attracted to a laser pointer, something to chase and destroy. She didn't laugh. I handed over my emails, my phone, my calendar. There was nothing, because there was nothing. But that didn't matter. The burden of proof in these cases is like a Rorschach test. You see what you want to see, and what people wanted was a villain. Madison, meanwhile, played the role of victim with Oscar-worthy conviction. She gave a tearful interview on the local news, talked about how unsafe she felt and how power dynamics were abused. She even cried, actual tears, like she'd lost something more than just her GPA. I screamed at the television like a lunatic. My apartment became a cave. I stopped shaving. I wore the same pair of sweatpants for 6 days straight. The only thing I consumed more than alcohol was rage. I watched my career rot in real time, wondering how many student evaluations Madison had to tank before deciding to go full nuclear. I'd seen the signs, but I thought reason would prevail. God, I was naive. About a month in, I got the official letter from the university. After careful review, we have determined that the preponderance of evidence supports the claimant's account. Preponderance, not proof, not beyond a reasonable doubt. Just enough fog to let the vultures land. Effective immediately, I was terminated. No severance, no goodbye. Just a sterile signature and the end of 20 years in academia. Didn't leave the couch for 3 days. My phone buzzed with spam and schadenfreude. I'd become a cautionary tale in a suit. Even my cat started looking at me with judgmental eyes. I had nothing, no job, no income, no purpose. Just a name no one would say out loud anymore. But somewhere in that haze of shame and shattered identity, something shifted. I got angry. Not the loud, dramatic kind. The quiet, precise kind. The kind that sharpens like a scalpel. Because if the world had decided I was a monster, maybe it was time to stop playing the part of the martyr. I knew Madison's father had influence, but influence has pressure points. And I'd spent 2 decades analyzing characters, peeling back layers, dissecting human nature like roadkill in a lit class. Madison thought I was just a sad, aging professor who wouldn't fight back. She was wrong. You want to know what happens? Next, let's just say, I remembered something very important. I still had tenure in the art of revenge. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But what they don't tell you is that it's also best served after you've spent 3 weeks watching Forensic Files with a bottle of scotch and a grudge. By the time I peeled myself off the couch, I'd already mapped out the basic structure of what I was about to do. See, Madison thought she'd buried me under the weight of Daddy's checkbook and a flimsy Title IX process that wouldn't survive a real courtroom. What she didn't realize is, when you teach literature long enough, you don't just learn how stories work. You learn how people unravel. I began with the oldest weapon in any academic's arsenal, research. I didn't need to hire a private investigator. Google and LinkedIn were enough. Madison Kingsley had her life mapped out like an Instagram mood. Bored. She was in a sorority that specialized in charitable performativity, drove a Mercedes G-Wagon her father leased under a shell company, and majored in communications, which, judging by her grades, was more aspirational than functional. More importantly, she had a side hustle. She ran a small but profitable OnlyFans account under the pseudonym Lola Lalux. Oh yes, Apparently, the same Madison who wept on camera about being violated by academic power structures also made 6 figures simulating sex acts with avocado toast in the background. God bless capitalism. Now, I wasn't about to shame a woman for monetizing loneliness, but hypocrisy is a whole other beast. Her entire complaint hinged on moral indignation, on being a fragile lamb led astray by a predatory professor. And yet here she was, not only profiting from sexual imagery, but doing it on university property. At least 2 of her videos were. Shot in a dorm room I recognized from faculty housing complaints. I screenshotted everything, archived it, dated it. Still, I needed more than salacious irony to fight the system that had chewed me up and spat me into oblivion. I needed a lever. So I looked into the Kingsley family business. Turns out, Madison's father, Richard Kingsley, or Rick the Donor, as the dean used to whisper at fundraising galas, was the CEO of a real estate development firm with more lawsuits than apartment complexes. Public records showed quiet settlements with contractors, zoning violations, and something suspiciously close to tax evasion through a non-profit arm that didn't even have a website. A bit of creative digging, thank you, disgruntled ex-employees, on Reddit, revealed that Kingsley and Cohen had paid for Madison's tuition through a scholarship fund they themselves administered. Legal, technically, ethical, please. But here's the twist. The fund required students to maintain a minimum GPA of 3.0 to continue receiving money. Madison was barely scraping a 2.1, and only that because half her classes were graded on participation and nepotism, meaning, if her grades dropped below 3.0, she'd lose access to the tuition fund, which, of course, would mean that Daddy Dearest would have to pay out of pocket. That might explain why she went nuclear on the one professor who refused to inflate her grade in exchange for eyelash fluttering and casual cleavage. I wasn't just a threat to her ego, I was a threat to her lifestyle. It made sense now. The timing, the melodrama, the desperation. She didn't just want to punish me, she needed to erase the possibility that she ever failed. Because failing meant consequences, and consequences weren't for people like her, but I was about to change that. The first thing I did was send an anonymous tip to the university's Scholarship Compliance Board. I attached proof of her GPA, screenshots from her Lola Lalux account showing explicit content shot in university housing, and a polite inquiry asking whether the Kingsley Family Endowment had rules about students conducting sex work in university-sponsored accommodations. Then, I made a second anonymous report to the IRS. I might have exaggerated slightly. Said I was a concerned former employee of Kingsley & Co., who had reason to believe the scholarship fund was a money laundering front. I cited irregular payments, the suspicious non-profit structure, and included a few fake internal memos. I mocked up using corporate templates and jargon so vague it could pass for real. Corporate America, I'd learned, thrives on ambiguity, but that wasn't enough. No, I wanted the world to see her fall, so I reached out to a former student of mine named Jordan. Jordan had graduated 2 years earlier and now worked at a semi-popular online publication known for scandalous exposés with titles like "I Got Ghosted by a Senator" and "My Dorm Room Was a Cult." Think BuzzFeed, but with less journalistic integrity and more dopamine. I fed him everything. Not just the OnlyFans content, but the discrepancy in her GPA, the scholarship connection, the fabricated text message she used in her complaint. I even gave him a copy of the disciplinary letter I received. Yes, I still had it, printed, highlighted, annotated like it was a term paper. Jordan ran the story under the headline, "The Ivy League Lolita, How a Rich Student Destroyed a Professor's Life to Hide Her Grades." It went viral in less than 24 hours. By noon, the university's Twitter account was flooded with calls for a formal review. Some called it a miscarriage of justice, Others just posted memes of a crying blonde woman holding a Starbucks cup, photoshopped to say, "Victim light TM." The fallout was immediate. The dean, who had once told me I was one of the brightest minds in the department, was now scrambling to explain why due process hadn't been followed. There were murmurs of reinstatement, of reparative action. The administration claimed they were re-evaluating their Title IX protocols. I got a call from the faculty union asking if I wanted to file for wrongful termination, but I wasn't interested in going back. They didn't deserve me. What I wanted was to see the Kingsley name rot in slow motion, and I got my wish. The IRS launched a formal audit of Kingsley & Co. Within weeks, Rick Kingsley was subpoenaed for documents related to his non-profit arm. Turns out, shell companies are harder to explain when someone's already poked holes in the paperwork. The university cut ties with the Kingsley Foundation pending further review, which meant no more donor dinners, no more building renovations with his name on them, and most importantly, no more free ride for Madison. Her Instagram went dark. Her OnlyFans account vanished. Rumor had it she transferred to a university in Florida under a different last name. A Cousins or something, one of those family names rich people use like burner phones. But the internet never forgets. Every time someone Googles her new alias, they still find the article, the memes, the screenshots. Me! I moved out of state. Took a job teaching night classes at a small liberal arts college in Oregon. It's nothing glamorous, no ivy walls, no espresso machines in the faculty lounge. But it's honest work. My students don't wear designer shoes to class. Most of them work part-time jobs and write essays with chip nails and brutal honesty. I like it here. Sometimes I still wake up angry. Not at Madison, not even at Rick, at the system, at how fast people ran when the tide turned, at how many friends couldn't even send a text, at how easily a life's work can be erased by a pretty face and a couple of lies. But then I remember something important. They thought they were writing my ending, but I turned it into a prologue. And now I teach my students more than literature. Teach them how power works, how stories are weaponized, and how sometimes villains are just heroes with better survival instincts. Some say closure is a myth, a bedtime story we tell ourselves to stop checking our enemy's social media at 2 a.m. with a glass of bourbon and a Google Incognito tab. Those people are wrong. Closure exists. It just looks nothing like what you'd expect. It doesn't come with apologies or grand revelations or karmic justice wrapped in a bow. It comes quietly. It comes when you've already decided they don't get to live rent-free in your head anymore. But I wasn't quite there yet. I wanted one more thing. See, after the IRS audit, after the viral expose, after the Kingsley family name went from respected donors to possible federal defendants, I had options. Law firms emailed me offering to represent me pro bono in a wrongful termination suit. Documentarians wanted to interview me. One particularly greasy agent pitched a Netflix docuseries called Ivory Towered. No thanks, I had no interest in being a sob story in someone else's narrative. Instead, I quietly wrote, not memoir, not some bleeding heart apology tour. I wrote a novel, fiction technically, but not really. I called it The Fabrication of Lola Lelux. It was about a spoiled rich girl who destroys a man's life with a lie, only to find herself devoured by the very machine she thought she controlled. It was vicious, unapologetic, petty in the most literate way imaginable. I sent it to a small press under a pseudonym, Dorian Grayfield, because why not be a little theatrical about it? And within 6 months, it had gone viral in the indie-lit world. People dissected it on TikTok. Book clubs asked questions like, "Do you think Madison represents the commodification of trauma?" while sipping wine and pretending they didn't Google the ending halfway through. And Madison, she found out. How? Do I know? Because one day I got an email, subject line, "You sick bastard." The address was untraceable, some burner account clearly made in a rage. But the tone, oh, unmistakable. Like perfume on a crime scene. It was her. She called me a monster, accused me of slander, threatened to sue, said I had ruined her life. She was right, of course. I had, gloriously, and I was just getting started, because the university, eager to save face after months of bad press and donor backlash, had quietly offered me a deal. They would pay me a six-figure settlement, formally clear my record, and issue a public statement saying that new evidence had come to light exonerating Professor A. I told them to shove it. I didn't want hush money. I wanted them to bleed. So I leaked the settlement offer. Anonymously, of course. Sent it to the same journalist who wrote the first piece. He published the whole damn thing with the headline, "University tries to buy silence of wronged professor while protecting donor's daughter." The outrage was delicious. Petitions were signed. Alumni pulled funding. Professors threatened to strike. Students painted "We Believe Men Too" in chalk all over the quad. Ironically, the same students who once held a vigil for Madison, complete with fake candles and real tears. Even the dean resigned. Early retirement, they called it. Sure, but the real cherry on top? A TEDx invitation. I almost deleted the email when it came through. "We believe your story could spark a global conversation about academic injustice and weaponized victimhood," it read. "Would you be willing to speak at our conference?" At first I laughed. Me on a stage, with a headset mic and dramatic lighting. The same man who once spent 10 minutes debating whether to wear a tie to a student orientation. But then I thought about it. I thought about the students watching. The other professors still too scared to speak. The quiet whispers in the break rooms, the careers ended over rumors, the families torn apart by false accusations, and a system that didn't care about truth, only optics. So I said yes, and I gave the talk of my life. I didn't hold back. I told the full story, masked in metaphor, names redacted, but the message clear that systems meant to protect the vulnerable can just as easily be used to destroy the innocent. That power isn't always held by the older, the richer, the male. Sometimes it's held by the one who knows the rules don't apply to her. The video got 5 million views in a week. The book hit the NYT bestseller list under controversial non-fiction thinly veiled as fiction. And I slept through the night for the first time in 2 years. But here's the thing, no one tells you about revenge. It doesn't fix you. It satisfies something primal. It gives your demons a snack, not a cure. I'd won, sure, but I still walked with the limp of what was taken. I still didn't trust new students when they smiled too wide. I still flinched when the dean of my new college called unexpectedly. Still, I was healing, one lecture at a time. My students in Oregon were wildly different than those Ivy League sociopaths I used to teach. They were broke, blunt, and uninterested in kissing up. One kid handed me a term paper that started with, "I didn't read the book, but I saw the movie, and here are my thoughts." It was somehow better than half the polished essays I used to grade. They kept me grounded, honest, reminded me that education wasn't supposed to be about tenure or wine mixers or the politics of donor relations. It was supposed to be about truth. Even if that truth came with profanity and grammatical errors, still, the past had claws. One evening, I was at a bookstore event for Dorian Grayfield. Yes, I still use the pseudonym. I liked the distance it gave me, like putting on armor. A woman in a red coat approached me during the signing, dark glasses, perfect nails. It was her, Madison, older now, thinner, worn, but still carrying herself like the world owed her something. I felt my chest tighten, my fingers tensed around the pen. She didn't speak. Just dropped a folded note on the table and walked away. I opened it after the event. It read, "You turn my life into fiction. Now it's your turn to live in it." Cryptic, threatening. Or maybe just pathetic. I didn't reply. She couldn't touch me anymore. Not legally, not professionally, not personally. I was no longer a character in her story. She was a footnote in mine. Still, I kept the note. Framed it, actually. Hung it above my desk. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that anyone can be a villain if the story is told wrong enough. Now I spend my days teaching stories and my nights writing them. My latest book is called The Allegations We Deserve. It's about a university that collapses under the weight of its own hypocrisy. It's fiction, mostly. Madison hasn't surfaced publicly in over a year. Her father's company was dissolved after a quiet settlement with the IRS. Rumor has it he moved to Dubai. Her OnlyFans archive was leaked on a revenge porn site, but I didn't have anything to do with that. Probably some other victim of her games. I'd feel sorry for her if I didn't remember every sleepless night, but I do. So instead I keep writing and teaching and reminding the next generation that truth doesn't always look noble, that justice is messy, and that sometimes the villain isn't who you think. Sometimes he's just a tired man in a blazer, sipping black coffee, asking you to analyze the crucible without missing the point. And if you do, well, let's just say I grade fairly, but I never forget.